probably already know Heather Flanagan. She's an amazing resource in the identity world. She's been involved with leadership roles with some of the most technical, volunteer-driven organizations on the internet. I'm going to try and list them all now, and it's going to take me a while. IDPro, OpenID Foundation, IETF, IAB, IRTF, ICANN, just to name a few. That's about all my head could hold. But she's also co-chair of several working groups showing how deep she goes with these organizations, like the W3C Federated Identity Working Group and the IETF SPICE Working Group, which I think Heather's going to talk a little bit about today. So without further delay, let me bring Heather to the stage.
Ta-da!
Heather, welcome. Take it away. It's all you.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Thanks for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides. I do realize that this is probably like the most boring title for what I'm hoping is going to be one of the most interesting talks that you hear today. All right. So, once upon a time, I thought that non-human identities were service accounts or the badge records in HR systems, which were really annoying to manage, sure. But that's like nothing like the world we're dealing with today. I mean, cloud computing has just taken over this once fairly constrained problem and made it central to everything we do. So today, non-human identities like APIs, workloads, batch jobs, they're everywhere. They enable our systems to function, but they also expose new vulnerabilities. Now, I want to inspire you to think about why the way we manage non-human identities needs to change and how standards like SCIT, WIMSE, and SPICE, and I'm going to explain all of those, how they can lead the way. But first, it's stories like mine where it's like, oh, how complicated could this possibly be? It's just a service account. It's just a thing. It's stories like mine that might very well lead to things like the recently announced Beyond Trust breach. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard about this, and the NHI management group has a great write-up about it. I mean, this is like, okay, what happens when managing non-human identities goes wrong? Well, to give you a quick backstory in case you missed it, in December 2024, Beyond Trust experienced a breach. Attackers compromised an API key, gaining access to Beyond Trust's SaaS platform. Darn. This allowed attackers to reset application passwords, and later that month, the U.S. Treasury reported a major incident stemming from this attack. So what do we need to learn from this, right? Well, one thing is never let a good emergency go to waste, right? By design, APIs expose functionalities to other systems, and that often includes sensitive data or actions, and that makes them a really prime target. Now, securing APIs isn't just about preventing the attacks, it's about maintaining trust in the systems that they're connecting, which comes to a pretty simple lesson. Non-human identities need processes and policies tailored to their unique roles, right? This breach wasn't just about an API key. It was about a static identity without proper management, a vulnerability that became an entry point for kind of a catastrophe. Now, before you focus on the token aspect of this, I do want to remind you that while this is an example of a poorly managed API key, API keys or OAuth tokens are no more non-human identities in and of themselves any more than a human identity is a password or a passkey. I mean, that's part of it, but there's so much more to it. So human identities, oops, there we go. Human identities follow predictable life cycles, right? You join, you move, you leave. Non-human identities, not so much, right? They do spin up and they spin down, but that can be in milliseconds. They can scale globally on demand, and they often just outnumber human identities by like orders of magnitude. This brings some pretty big challenges, right? Of course, your static credentials, which you're probably used to maintaining, become more of a liability than they are today, leading to risks like token sprawl. Your workloads, which are acting autonomously in your batch jobs or whatnot, they're operating entirely without human oversight. And traditional identity tools just don't scale to this reality. Now, the Beyond Trust breach is a perfect example, right? It's a single API key tied to a static identity turned into an entry point for a major incident. This mismatch between traditional human models and NHI behavior means it's not actually just the tools that we need to rethink, it's the entire approach to identity management. So pay attention. I want to come back to that in a minute. So I want to set a bit of a baseline as to what digital identities, human or otherwise, need to be safe and productive members of our little IT systems, right? They need to demonstrate their identity and the purpose and scope of their request. We'll refer to that as contextual validation. They benefit from cryptographic proofs like JSON Web Tokens, also called JOTs, or X509 certificates, and they need those to securely bind their identity to a specific action, which is cryptographic assurance for the win. They do have a life cycle that must be managed, but these are dynamic and sometimes downright ephemeral identities that need management appropriate to their fluidity or lack thereof. And let's not forget that they may need to cross trust boundaries in a federated workflow. I mean, more and more companies are making the most of their cloud infrastructure by using different vendors where it makes sense. Workflows aren't going to necessarily live in their own little cloud, and that means you've got to manage permissions, credential formats, and so on that can work from one environment to the next in order to complete your task at hand. So focusing on those four characteristics, contextual validation, cryptographic assurance, dynamic and ephemeral identity management, and cross-boundary trust, what does that look like for human identity? I mean, all of this should look pretty familiar to any of you who've worked in a traditional IAM environment, right? Contextual validation looks like authentication using static credentials like passwords or passkeys or biometric scans. It involves an access model that's often role-based with permissions tied to, say, organizational hierarchies or specific job functions, like approving an invoice or accessing email. If the IAM system happens to be really on top of things, right, context like geolocation or time of access may be used for risk-based decisions, blocking a login temp from an unusual location. Now, cryptographic assurance has its own human flavor as well, right? Credentials often include usernames, passwords, or passkeys if you're doing it right. And of course, there are additional layers like multi-factor authentication involving hardware tokens or one-time passcodes, and they're following a very human-centric workflow. Now, dynamic identities are also a thing in human systems. This looks like identities that are persistent, but they change during significant lifecycle events like onboarding, promotions, or terminations. Join, remove, or leave workflows, handle these transitions in tools like Active Directory or other directory-like services. Cross-boundary trust, I know, even if you don't know that term, I know you're familiar with it because you have used single sign-on. You have been exposed to the externalization of authentication and authorization. It's super common with human identities. It happens in R&E education, research and education federations. It happens in the IRA network federations, used to be called GAN. It's in social logins. Federated authentication is absolutely a thing. Great. I'm sure all of that made sense. And you're all making sure that your organizations are doing all of that properly for the humans in their systems. But here's the thing, right? While non-human identities also need contextual validation, cryptographic assurance, and all of that, they don't need it in quite the same way. It looks a little different. For NHIs to function securely, they do need contextual validation, but that's looking like permissions tailored to specific tasks and dynamically validated. They do need cryptographic assurance, credentials like JOTs or CBOR web tokens or X509 certificates, but they're issued dynamically and very securely. Your lifecycle management is going to focus on ephemeral lifecycle. NHIs just don't follow join, remove, or leave workflows. So provisioning has to be automated and it has to be prepared for that kind of ephemeral environment. And cross-boundary trust, this happens, right? NHIs often operate across clouds and systems. And so there are frameworks that need to be taken into account that don't look like, say, a SAML federation or an OpenID Connect federation necessarily. They look a little bit different. So here's why I want to be maybe just a little bit provocative. If you're on top of your IAM game, a lot of what I described for non-human identities is actually something that the experts are promoting for all identity systems, even human identity systems. We have a lot of excellent best practice guidance about how to manage human identities, from zero trust models, flexible and adaptive assurance levels, context-aware provisioning. I mean, we have the capability to do a lot with human identity. That said, I recognize we're not all necessarily following those best practices. If we were, identity wouldn't be the source of so many breaches in the world. But there are, facing reality, there's so many legacy systems out there that just don't support the best practices that we know exist, which is a sad state of affairs, but it is the world that we live in. But where we've allowed for that in how human IAM systems are architected for reasons, I think we're going to need a much more strict environment for non-human identities. And I might even suggest that if and when we architect our IAM systems for non-human identities properly, that becomes the one true way that human identities are going to have to adhere to. Isn't that a lovely, brave new world? Okay, but to get there from here, there's a pretty basic step you need to take. And that's developing the technical standards that will let us operate our diverse environments. Now, if you don't know, and I know Apurva mentioned it a little bit, standards development is just one of my favorite things. Standards are the glue that hold our IT systems together. Without them, every organization would be building its own tools, its own processes, its own solutions, which is not only leading to a lot of inefficiency, but it's also creating security gaps where these systems don't align. It's just not pretty. By adopting recognized standards that were built via consensus models, we can enable non-human identity to just work seamlessly across platforms. This is like crazy talk, while maintaining just the highest levels of security and trust. So we've seen how traditional identity models struggle to keep up with the dynamic nature of non-human identities, and these challenges, whether it's the mismatch with traditional identity life cycles or the vulnerabilities exposed by static credentials. I mean, it's making one thing really clear, I think, and that's that you can't just try and solve these problems a little bit here and a little bit there. To manage NHIs effectively, you're going to have sort of a unified, standardized approach to doing it. So let's talk about three standards, three efforts that got me interested in the non-human identity space. This is now like the next part of my origin story as to why I've been looking at this at all. Standards like SPIFFE, WIMSE, and SCIT, all of which are being developed within the IETF. I mean, they're going to provide the foundation for secure and interoperable ecosystems, and I think that's just such a lovely goal. The acronyms expand into a bit of a mouthful, so you'll understand why these acronyms exist in the first place. SCIT is Supply Chain Integrity, Trust, and Transparency. WIMSE is the Workload Identity for Multi-Systems Environments, and SPICE is Secure Patterns for Internet Credentials. Now, these standards actually build on each other. They each act at a different layer in the stack, which I think is pretty darn cool. And I'm going to start at the bottom of the stack with SCIT. So SCIT, as the name suggests, focuses on ensuring transparency and trust in the software supply chain, which, it's trying to build make sure that every component is tied to a verified process, right? At its core, SCIT provides a framework. It's about cryptographic proofs, signed attestations, validated processes that make it easier to trust what you're building and buying, which all sounds really cool, but let me give you some actual examples as to what that means. So software bills of materials, also known as SBOMs. SCIT is working to enhance the accuracy and traceability of SBOMs, which is necessary for real-time decision-making and making SBOMs tamper-proof, such that if, something way down the chain turns out to have a 0-day critical vulnerability, you can act on that automatically and immediately. Something like SCIT ensures that you have certified compilers so that your trusted tools that are used throughout your development process, you can avoid issues like backdoor injection attacks or compiler-induced vulnerabilities. And compliance is made a lot simpler because SCIT aligns really well with regulations like the European Cyber Resilience Act and various US presidential executive orders around cybersecurity. I mean, this is making it easier for vendors to meet these evolving legal requirements. Okay, WIMSE. Now, WIMSE works the next layer up. It's defining the standards and best practices for managing workload identities, which is ensuring a consistent approach across all these different environments. The idea here is to address things like runtime provisioning and integrated signals like SBOM compliance, which we will get from SCIT for real-time decisions. WIMSE is standardizing secure identity presentation for workload components for NHIs to enable least privilege access and it's going to obtain signals from different audit trails so that IT admins get much better visibility and can exercise control over the workload identities. Of course, to make all of this challenging, all of this has to be platform agnostic because, again, no one is deploying single platforms environments. Okay, you've got your verified supply chain. You've got your identity presentation for workload components. What's left? It's the credential format to help identify the non-human identities and give a place for their attributes to come along for the ride. Now, sometimes processes and APIs have nothing to do with humans, but sometimes they do. They might run as a person in order to do something on a person's behalf, or they might, someone may need to, a person may need to have signed off on it, something like that. Right. And in those cases where you've got this credential that's now touching both human and non-human, you want a credential format that's lightweight enough to support untold numbers of workload identities and the human identities that might be existing in the same ecosystem. And that's where SPICE lives. While standardizing a common format makes a lot of sense, it's complicated because, with human identity, you have issues like privacy, identity verification and proofing, and revocation as a really big deal. But those same issues either don't apply or they don't apply in the same manner for workload identities. Now, if you insist on constraining the credential to be entirely human in its concerns, it's actually too burdensome for the millions of apps and processes to handle at the speeds necessary. But if you don't constrain it and take the privacy considerations into account, security problems may creep in and developers may misuse the credentials. So yeah, this is kind of important to get right. This working group is making solid progress on a specification for selective disclosure using CBOR web tokens, which are CBOR is a little bit more constrained than JSON. And I'm one of the co-chairs for this one. This is one of the areas I volunteer my time. So I hope you've taken away a couple of interesting things, not just from my talk, but from the other talks that you are attending today. Non-human identities cannot be an afterthought. They can't just be an annoyance. They are a critical player in our systems, but managing them isn't the same as managing human identities, which frankly may be more of a reflection on how we're handling human identities than non-human. NHIs operate at scale, at speed, at a complexity that our traditional approaches can't handle. So here's the exciting part. What we're doing with NHIs today isn't just about solving the immediate problems for the non-human part. It's about creating something better for IAM as a whole. Getting non-human identity management right, using strong foundations, raising that bar for what we can do. I mean, we're setting the stage for innovation just across the board. So here's my challenge to you. Let's make that happen, right? Support the standards work. Look at how your organizations manage NHIs today. Because these challenges, they're only going to get more complex as our systems grow. So here on this slide, I've got some additional reading for you. And in each of these things, there's actually pointers to more things that you might find interesting. Standards don't develop themselves, right? By working together, by adopting the recognized standards, you're staying ahead of the curve and you're helping build something remarkable for the whole internet, something that's scalable, something that's secure, something that's ready for the future. So just like, APIs are connecting our systems, our standards are going to actually make all of that interoperable. And I think we can do this. With that, I write material for fun on my website. I've touched NHI there a couple times. You can I've written there. You can follow me on LinkedIn, catch up with me on Blue Sky. I'd love to hear your questions.
Heather, thank you so much. There's a roar of virtual applause right now for your exploration of standards. We are disappointed, however, that none of your cats made an appearance during the presentation, but we'll have to rectify that next time. We've got a few minutes and we've got a pretty active Q&A. First is just a clarification. Are all three of the standards you presented driven by the IETF? And are there other organizations that are driving standards in this area that people should be aware of?
I mean, there's a lot going on in the standard space. It kind of depends on like what industry you're in. So the PCI compliance, if you actually read the PCI specification, there's actually stuff in there about non-human identity. Give you, as one example. There are other examples where it's like, okay, OpenID Connect may or may not, we think about it in terms of humans, but it may not necessarily be that way. And you'll have use cases that's happening in the OpenID Foundation. There's there's so much happening in the standard space. I kind of want to show you all a picture I did about that, just how confusing it can get.
That's great. So maybe we should post that afterwards. We'll post that to LinkedIn about the event or something like that so everyone can see it. I think that's cool. Couple more questions for you. This one's on the edge, so if you can't answer it, it's okay. But the audience wants to know. It's kind of, I think it's closely tied to what's going on in AI right now, but the idea is around voice recognition. And should it still be a valid method, and whether or not there are standards that can safeguard the threat around voice spoofing or deepfakes?
This is going to sound like many years ago when I started in tech. I was actually a SendMail administrator. So I was managing email systems back in. And what we found when we were trying to prevent spam was it was just a constant game of catch up. We would invent something to prevent spam. The folks would invent something to get around it. Then we would have to respond to that, and then they would get around it. And then it's happening today, right? Do we give up on current methods like voice recognition or whatnot? No, but don't settle on them. Because as soon as you've enabled for that, the attackers are going to find a way around it. So you're going to have to be prepared to constantly innovate in terms of what you do, constantly improve, voice recognition. Okay, but now can you, what mechanisms might you want to put in place to be able to say, yes, we know this is being done by a person, or yes, we know this is being done by an AI. And if we don't know, don't trust it.
Great. And we could go deep on spam itself. But tying to your answer there, another question came in, which is, do you think the standards for NHI and AI agents are the same with regards to access, or do you think they should be treated differently due to their level of intelligence?
I think that's happening at different layers, to be honest. One of the areas that I'm really fascinated by is personhood credentials. How do you recognize, and indicate whether something is a person, something is acting on behalf of a person, and which person is it acting on? Right. That's actually like a whole nother layer of work that's underway. Again, in the IETF, but not in any of the groups I mentioned. There's a new working group. I forget what AI prep is the how it breaks down, but it's basically trying to build a taxonomy of language to be able to describe what is an AI, what does it look like, how do you know whether information is coming from an AI or not. I think so. It's all going to become related, but we don't quite have the bridging it all together yet. It's still bits and pieces, and we're still trying to figure out how and when to pull it together.
Got it. And that how and when to pull it together gives us a chance for our last question. We have about 30 seconds, and there's no way you can answer in that time. But what do you think it's going to take to accelerate the work that we're doing on standards so we can secure NHIs more effectively sooner?
People. Oddly enough, it's going to take people who can actually spend time on thinking the big thoughts of putting this together. The reason standards development is so slow is because it's a human consensus process. Without people really invested in making it all work, it will continue to take as long as it takes, which is probably not fast enough.
Heather, thank you so much for your time. This was an amazing session. We really appreciate you having here. Now let's get back to work and make those standards happen.